Well, hello, that's me again. Today is December 4th. It's Wednesday, I believe. And I decided to do a little bit of sort of Q&A because many people repeat those questions and I just have to react to them. And some of those questions, I'm not talking about whatever is posted by all kinds of trolls and IPSO assets, but many of those questions are totally legitimate. But before I go, I need to show you this. And this will be relevant, actually, germane to our discussion on the logistics, which I'm going to do today. But here it is. This is really extremely important, to put it mildly. Admiral Gorshkov frigate not only now basically finished testing of the Zircon missiles, it actually left for the combat patrol. And it carries Zircon anti-shipping and land attack missiles with a range of around 1,500 kilometers. And that changes the naval warfare forever, never to come back as we used to know it. And Gorshkov is just one of the ships, and that means that Zircon is being basically loaded and prepared for such ships as, for example, Marshal Shaposhnikov and other frigates of this project, of this class. And of course, eventually it goes to the corvettes, such as the Project 2385. And eventually it will end up on those, pesky, small missile ships. And after that, to the submarines. And you can look it up, what it means, by just basically taking the compass, getting into the map of whatever, world ocean, and drawing the circle with the radius of 1,500 kilometers. That will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And that, I elaborated on this on several occasions, so you don't have to constantly just keep it in mind. Just know that it is out there now, and things are not going to be the same. Now, I want to start with the sort of Q&A. But before I go to the Q&A, I want to address the question which many people, and obviously people, and I say this with love and compassion, brainwashed, but by all kinds of the politologists, political scientists, especially from the Russian side, who when speaking about the conflict in Ukraine, they constantly weep, they constantly complain that, oh my God, United States and combined West made Slavs killing Slavs. Well, hello. And the point is, if they have such an issue that they talk about, oh my God, brotherly nations killing each other, well, I have some news for them. First, Slavs are pretty good at kicking each other's ass, just enough to take a look at the basically history of Russia and Poland to start with. And then, of course, let me do the forensic experiment. If you live in some community and you have the neighbor who is as pure blood as you are, but he is a rapist and a killer, and you have the basically the other neighbor who is of completely different race, completely different culture, but a nice and very good man and woman, nice family, peaceful. So what will be your option? What will be your choice? Well, of course you wouldn't like to live there with this pure bread, pure blood, whatever racial brethren who is a rapist and a killer, and you would rather live with people who are absolutely different color, different what have you, and yet they are nice, decent people. So here's the issue. Why to bring the race here, that Slavs killing Slavs? I mean, Nazis, they went, they came in all kinds of colors and actually races. There were some Jews actually who were Nazis. So there you go. So I want to stop on this baloney because Russia doesn't fight Ukrainians per se. Russia fights Nazism, and that's the whole other story. But now let's go back to the issue of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And for people who constantly speak about all kinds of this tactical minutia, I constantly stress this, and I wrote 3 books on it, and I write the 4th book on this, that we they fight, unlike it is in the World War II, or unlike it is even in Vietnam, in the complete ISR dense field. And that means aerial and space-based and obviously ground-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, which some of them are with extremely high-level technology, extremely complex, extremely sophisticated, especially when we talk about the satellites, or rather not single satellite, but we talk about constellation of satellites. And here is the issue. Everything we do in the aerial warfare, and in this particular case we talk about the special military operation, you have to remember that the air borders, airspace of the country is defined by basically continuation of the contour, ground contour of the country, vertically upward until it hits the basically altitudes which separate the airspace from the space, outer space, so to speak. And so everything which flies within your nation's airspace is a legitimate target, and you can shoot it down. Everything which is beyond this wall, so to speak, which is very complex, contour, as it follows the state borders of the nation, you cannot do that unless, of course, you fight the real war with the declaration of the war, and that's it. Nothing you can do about it. Russia can fly now, for example, one of her intelligence assets, one of her intel planes, next to the airspace of the United States. Of course, the United States will fly the planes, and they will be following it in the international airspace, but they cannot shoot it down. And Russians will, for example, will spy on collect basically signal intelligence or even optical intelligence doing this. So exactly what NATO is doing. They fly those drones, they fly all those planes outside Russia's airspace, and they collect all possible intel, primarily signal intelligence, and especially developing the electromagnetic map of Russian air defense. But I mean, once you get out and high into the border between the airspace and the space itself, bang, things change. And the things there, they are governed by the United Nations Space Treaty. This is the United Nations Space Treaty, which is treaty on principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. So you have to, you are more than welcome to, just basically look up this treaty, read it, and then obviously you can follow all kinds of other resolutions which go along with this treaty, such as this resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations in the December 16, 2020, about the reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior. So remember now, once you can see this, we can easily conclude that outer space, everything which I believe it's around 90 kilometers. I could be wrong. You are free to look it up, so don't quote me on that. But I believe it's altitude of 90 something plus minus kilometers above the Earth, and it is somewhere around 100 kilometers height where the actual space begins. And anything after that is not regulated by the national legislatures. They are regulated by the United Nations document, treaty, and it's free for all. Anybody who wants to launch the satellite, they are more than welcome to do that. But of course, this comes, with all those non-caveats, so to speak. You can fly whatever you want over the territory of whatever the country you want. For example, Russian early warning system Cupola, which consists now of 6 satellites, early warning satellites, which warn about possible launch of the ballistic missiles targeted or aimed at Russia. It flies constantly. It sweeps non-stop 24/7 there are basically the territory of the United States and some other areas. So goes for all kinds of the navigational satellites, obviously. You understand that GPS is called Global Positioning System for a reason. Of course, they fly on a very high So goes for GLONASS. So goes for other types of the satellite constellations, including the Elon Musk Starlink and all other communication satellites and positioning satellites, and much of the commercial satellites which are used, as you might have guessed it already, by the Pentagon, for example. And they are working 24/7 non-stop in favor, so to speak, of the armed forces of Ukraine and all those contingent of NATO people who try to defeat Russia, which of course in vain, but still. And here we come to the point that, yeah, that's what happens when you have this situation. The space is free for all, and the United States runs those sweeps non-stop over especially territory of the former Ukraine. And let me show you something about this. You can read about this in the articles of war and space on the website of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And here one of the professors of the international law and laws of war writes about the specifically about the space, and he writes that for the foreseeable future, military space activities will be primarily about using, targeting, or protecting satellites. Consider the focus of the regulations of the kinetic anti-satellite weapons, ASATs, in the wake of recent tests. And he mentions that basically China and Russia and India, they have now all those anti-satellite weapons. But, of course, we can go immediately after that to the basically what have been discussed in terms of these weapons, anti-satellite weapons, and how they apply to the issue of the combating what is known specifically as the military satellites. For example, like American latest keyhole satellite. It's the best America ever placed on the orbit. And again, it's not as high orbit as, for example, GPS satellites or GLONASS satellites, which fly in the tens of thousand kilometers around the Earth. No, we're talking about the optical electronic means such as keyhole, which flies on the relatively low orbits, because the main idea of those satellites, the same as the Russian satellites have some same capability, similar capability, they look at the ground. They study what troops are moving there, what is happening, you know, and what forces are getting prepared for whatever they're getting prepared. Offensive, defensive, what have you. So, and they fly on a much lower orbits, and for example, Russia has all necessary means, including the missile, kinetic and non-kinetic means like lasers, like periscope, to wipe off all of these constellations, including the basically stopping, sabotaging the work of the all, for example, communication satellite by the SpaceX, by Elon Musk, you know, Starlink. So, but you cannot do this that simply, and here comes the issue. So we can go to basically Russian very well established newspaper is Gazeta.ru, it's establishment newspaper. But before we go there, we have to understand that people still trying to figure out how to deal with this military basically threats from the space, especially in terms of targeting, and especially in terms of recon. And here it is. Some of the people from West primarily, but not only from the West, they are discussing this in terms of the what is called trying to design the Woomera manual on the international law of military space operations, because we have to be real people. Yeah, the situation is such that we are going to be fighting in space. We're going to be conducting, which we are already all, advanced countries such as United States, Russia, China, we are conducting the space warfare operations. And the Woomera, it's named after the village in the Australia, and this is what they want to develop. There's some kind of manual, some kind of legal framework, which in the context of outer space has not been comprehensively examined. This resulting lack of normative clarity presents the risk of state or non-state actors taking actions involving outer space that might be misunderstood by others or even characterized as unlawful. or even casus belli or casus belli, which is of course the start of war. For example, if I want to now remove, which for example Russia can remove the American early warning satellites, the early warning satellites of Russia launching missiles, once one of those satellites is killed and it is confirmed, it would be already viewed as the start of the war. That is why people say, oh, why don't we shoot down those damn satellites? Well, most advanced nations, especially Russia in this particular case, they can do that. But you cannot do that. It's not as simple as you might think from the legal point of view. The same goes if the United States decides to suppress or sabotage or kill, which is, we have to speak very separately on this issue, if the United States can really do that. But, for example, if the United States wants to sabotage the Kupol, one of the satellites of Kupol's constellation for Russia, which is early warning, guess what? It's indication of the start of the war. And guess what? It's very dangerous because some people in some countries will decide that, you know what, we're under attack, let's launch. And there you go, the rest is history. So, and here is the article in Gazeta.ru where Mr. Vorontsov, the deputy of the one of the Minister of the Foreign Affairs, and he's talking about this on the 27th of October last year, well, just basically 2 months ago. He's talking about, I quote for you, Russia can take aim at the American space satellites if they will be used against Russia for their conveyance or transfer of their intelligence data to Ukraine. So there you go. And some people say, well, yeah, that might be PR. Actually, it might not. And here comes the issue. Here's Vorontsov explains how it could be done. Look at this. And he refers here to the New York Times. He's talking about that the information that Pentagon transfers to Kiev, all those data of the space intelligence have been floating around for quite some time. Even in May, the New York Times wrote about that American satellites report to Ukraine about the movement of Russian troops at the territory of Ukraine, and they have been conveyed to SBU, the security service of Ukraine. And he's talking about, of course, militarization of space. But, and here he makes this caveat: Pentagon cannot do this directly. They cannot transfer this data directly to Ukraine because in this situation, Washington will be accepted by international community as the side of the conflict, as the part to the conflict with all consequences. Consequently, as Mr. Vorontsov says, they need to doing this through the commercial, companies, which Pentagon finances. And come on, Starlink is also a Pentagon program, primarily. And of course, doing this, they lose the time on the transfer of information. So in this case, they use the commercial satellites. And you know what? The Russians have been very clear on that, and you just saw yourself the statement from the foreign ministry that, you know what, if need be, commercial satellites will be shut down or will be sabotaged, or Russia can completely just basically sabotage them to the point that they will be unusable. So that's the situation we have developing, but this reflects completely on the modern warfare of which I write about, my fourth book. That, you know what, guys, you basically sneeze, you already know what happens. Same what happened with the situation with the 89 Russian soldiers and officers which have been struck due to their use of the cell phone. And for people who read about Mr. Semyon Pegov, who is a journalist, that means he graduated journalist school, and he now says that he doubts that this version is correct. Well, he's nobody. Of course, he is the adrenaline junkie, and he is a military reporter who does basically what? Tactical minutia. He would know shit from Shinola in this case because he graduated Smolensk journalist department, Smolensk University journalist department. In other words, the guy is uneducated. But yeah, he is kind of like, just famous blubbermouth. So there you go. But obviously, yeah, That's ISR. You basically live within the ISR environment, and United States and consequently Ukraine have a pretty good understanding of where Russians go and what they do. Well, so do Russians. Actually, they have a very good understanding of what Ukrainians do and what the NATO is doing. So it's kind of two can dance. It takes two to dance, and whatever will be the issue with the military warfare, real warfare operations in the space, we'll have yet to see. We'll see soon enough, I think. Now, this is about the space. Now, some people ask me and also about logistics. And here is the issue which I want to address in terms of logistics when, for example, and I spoke about this in my last video, when there was this basically assumption that NATO can go directly and fight Russia. Well, as I already stated, I think the probability of that is fairly low. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I mean it's fairly low, at least for now. Plus, United States and NATO, they do not have the force structure and the depth to do that. But obviously, even from the first news which I told you at the beginning of this conversation, that Gorshkov now is already on the combat patrol and carries the Zircon anti-shipping and land attack missiles, and of course we can expect new ships already being loaded with, or maybe already on the patrol somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, like Marshal Shapashnikov and other types of the ships capable of carrying Zircon. So that changes it everything and speaks directly to the issue of the logistics, because obviously for the United States, even if you imagine that United States goes full draft, we're not going to discuss here the social impact of that and what can start here. It will make Vietnam protests look like a chicken feed. So, but point is that the oceans begin to be closed pretty much completely for the United States to resupply European theater of operation, and United States and NATO right now, they don't have the force needed to fight anything against Russia conventionally on the European theater of operations. And I want to show you something which I also discussed it about when I was comparing, for example, 46 to about 50-ton T-90s and T-72B three Russian tanks with the almost 70 tons M1 Abrams, which, for example, Poles are really glad to receive this monstrous rumbling piece of armor. And let me show you some really little thing about logistics, just small part to kind of demonstrate to you what we are talking about. And as I already stated, when you hit the 65 tons, you basically cut yourself off about probably, I don't know, 30 to 50% of the bridges in the Western and Eastern Europe which you can cross, because you're going to crash them and fall through. And that is what the obviously American armor is. I'm talking about Abrams tanks, and here it is. Obviously, the part of the logistics always is that you need to, when you do not have bridges, you need to actually make the or develop the forts, the floating bridges. And to do that, you use this type of things. Here it is. You have the comparison here of the, for example, Russian MTU-90M. We're not talking about the huge number of other MTU-90s, but MTU-90M went into the production fairly recently. You will see the number 2008, I believe. Before that, Russians were using MTU-90, and here is your M1074, American one. Immediately, look at this. You have to carry those floating bridges, you have to unfold those bridges over rivers, and look at that. M1074 has the mass of 68.7 tons, while Russian has more than 20 tons less. And guess what? They carry pretty much the same lengths and widths of those bridges, floating bridges. So, how are you going to move this 69 tons almost? Nobody knows, but we can go and go further and look at this. Look what we have here. the basically the range which those things can do. And you have to understand, this is army engineering assets. They are crucial for the deployment of the troops. Look at this. M1074 has 420 kilometers of range. Russian one has 650, and that is extremely important. And then, of course, we can compare the numbers. Russians already produced more than 60 MTU-90M, plus they have a very large number of MTU-90s, which are pretty much slightly inferior to the 90M. But M1074 has, well, they said there's more than 51. It was in the serial production, but do not forget, it still has the platform of the Abrams tank. And the only thing United States can do right now is basically use the older, what is called conserved Abrams tanks, and reconfigure them for that type of the vehicle, which is crucial if you want to fight a real war against the peer. But of course there is the problem: United States cannot produce Abrams tanks anymore. Russia, however, produces tanks non-stop, and it has about, I believe, between 12 to 16,000 of them in conservation, which could be used as platforms for all kinds of things. And when you look at this, this tells you immediately that, you know what, having the engineering vehicle with 70 tons trying to do something in Europe, yeah, I would say there will be issues with that, to put it mildly, because most, well, not most, but pretty much half of those bridges are not designed for that type of weight, let alone when you have several of them crossing. So there you go. That explains to you basically how it affects, for example, operational tempo. It's basically the speed of movement of your assets and troops and things of this nature, including, of course, shooting salvos. And this is just the part of it, and this is a very small part of it. And then, of course, there is that such thing, which is, well, all those military reporters don't talk about, but this is what operational level officers speak about constantly. In Russian, it's called KTG, KTG, coefficient технической готовности, which means coefficient of the technical readiness. Do you know the norms for NATO? I can give you one example from what I know, and this is I know from the officers of the operational level who basically operate with this data, and it's not really secret. It's just you will not find it in the open sources on all kinds of the PR and pop sci and pop war publications, because the coefficient of the technical readiness means what? How many of assets in the unit you have ready to just literally jump into them, be that planes, tanks, or whatever, and fly and drive and start fighting. Well, in Russia, for example, KTG for, let's say, tank company, it's a tank, 10 tanks, is actually 90%. That means 9 tanks out of 10 has to be constantly technically ready. But in Bundeswehr, for example, if anybody wonders, that KTG, or the coefficient of the technical readiness, is counted as probably 60%, which is 6 out of tanks should be ready. So that explains to you also the levels and it's called normatives by Russians, how you prepare your army for fighting. And when you look at this, it all directly relates to logistics and how you have to supply it. So how are you going to resupply the Europe, which produces nothing basically of that value and cannot replenish or replace the losses in case of the real serious war with Russia? You can't. First, the United States doesn't produce it themselves, and then suddenly you have this classic Gorshkov pincer strategy, which basically cuts off Europe from the shipping lanes of communications over Atlantic, and nothing gonna pass through, or whatever going to get through. I mean, it will be absolutely not enough. And then suddenly we go and we look at the basically picture of the possible conventional conflict between, let's say, Russia and NATO, and you can see yourself immediately, you will begin to see yourself that basically logistically it's impossible for the combined West, for NATO to fight it. And this is just in general words, but you know what, we can always look up at the maps and we can always calculate the assets which go into this. And this is what I wanted to tell you about it, because people ask constantly, why don't we shoot down the satellite? Yes, we can, but we better not, at least for now. What to do with logistics? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Try to move that rumbling, you know, American armor and I don't think so it's possible anymore in any normal quantities to create a serious conventional arms, combined arms operation. So there you go. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. It's still danger. NATO is a danger. Obviously, NATO can still deal damage to Russia. And obviously, there will be many people die, God forbid, if we begin to look at the possible conventional conflict. But this is what it is. And in the end, in conclusion today, I strongly suggest you to visit my blog where I write and report some news which has been around in science and basically have been around, and clues have been floating around for years now, why Russia is not dependent on the West in terms of its microelectronics, because obviously the sensational admission that Russia already at 2011 had the lithography prototypes for the 30 nanometers, well, that should come as a surprise for everybody who thinks that Russia is cannibalizing washing machine to get all those microchips. And yes, Russia is on the track to produce her own lithography equipment, and yeah, it's gonna be, what, 7 nanometers in couple 3 years. That was the plan, and now we know that this plan probably is very realistic. But this is what I wanted to tell you today and do the kind of Q&A thing. And so I hope so that I address this a little bit. So as always, my friends, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel and support me through Patreon and through, you know, buying me coffee. Those money I used to buy me Jack Daniels. So, well, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be speaking to you guys later. Have a nice rest of the week. Bye-bye.